why not use prairie grass for paper and at the same time regenerate that soil? What I've been really talking to my students about recently in the past 4 or 5 years was simply about the difference between local and global change. And I'm always encouraging my students to think about it from a local perspective. From a Renourish standpoint, that's going through a lot of rewrite and rethinking. And I started to ask myself, like, what are we trying to sustain? We need to give back. We've taken too much.
Welcome to another episode of the Design Podcast. Today's guest, Eric Benson. Eric is an associate professor and chair of graphic design at the University of Illinois in the School of Art and Design in the College of Fine and Applied Arts. Eric, a native of Arizona, raised in mid-Michigan, received his BFA in graphic design and industrial design from the University of Michigan. He worked professionally as a UI/UX designer at Razorfish and Texas Instruments before he received his MFA in design from the University of Texas. His MFA thesis became internationally recognized and award-winning through his design website, renourish.org. Eric and I talk about Renourish, we talk about his environmental passions, and we talk about fresh press paper and many other areas with design and environmental sustainability. Once again, if you're enjoying the podcast, please be sure to go to thedesignedpodcast.com where you can see all of our past episodes. You can find the Designed Podcast on many podcast platforms, so be sure to subscribe, follow along, and please share the episodes, and let's encourage others to continue to create success in design education. Let's get on with it then, and here is Eric and I talking about environmental sustainability and design. Eric, welcome to the Design Podcast. I'm so glad that you agreed to join me and have a conversation about your research.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Hey, I just want you to give us kind of a synopsis, if you will, of your background, right? What got you into design education? What are you doing? How was the journey? That kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Where are you now? Yeah.
Well, where am I now? I'll start there. I'm in Champaign, Illinois, which is home to the University of Illinois, the flagship campus for the state of Illinois. And we're in the Big Ten. I teach graphic design here. I believe this is my 13th year teaching, which is really hard to believe because I don't think I spent more than 2 years in any of my jobs going back to right when I graduated from college. So I can't believe I've been here for that long, but it's a great place, and I do enjoy teaching, which is a real surprise to me, to be honest with you, because when I went to the University of Michigan and I got my graphic design degree from there. I also got an industrial design concentration there too, and I worked for like 8 years. I was doing a lot of stuff in the mainly, I think, the user interface interaction design world.
Okay.
But I did some print.
Interesting, because as we start talking about some of the research you've done, it's a different world in a way.
It is.
Yeah, very much so. Hey, you also told me before we got started here that you have a guest with you today that might make an appearance.
Yeah, my cat, it's my daughter's cat, but it's my cat too, because I pay for its food and lodging, but she will not leave the desk. So awesome. Hopefully she won't interrupt anything, but if she does, no she's cute. It's not a worry.
Yeah. I'm actually looking forward for the moment that she gets involved in the conversation and even pops on screen, as long as she's appropriate.
She is. She's dressed. Everything's ready to go.
Excellent. All right. So how did you make this interesting shift then from this digital environment then to, and notice the word I chose there, right? To environmental awareness work.
Good segue. That's an interesting story. I was working in Dallas, Texas. I was actually hired as an interaction designer at Texas Instruments, which is home in Dallas, Texas. And but I got asked to do a whole bunch of different things. Designers wear different hats every day. And I got thrown into packaging design, exhibition design, and I still did print. They had me do a number of different things there. And then, I started to have these kind of questions while I was there about I started to hear about recycled paper. This is around 2000 and 2, something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yeah.
And I had thought about it before. I had always sort of recycled as a kid, and I was definitely aware, but I never thought like, oh my gosh, I could design to be better for the environment. I never thought about that until I went to TI sent me to a conference up in Vancouver. It was an AIGA conference, Power of Design conference in 2003. And I heard a speaker there, and I bought his book, and it just changed my life. Pretty much on the flight back, I said, I need to go to graduate school and try to figure out how to live better and design better in harmony with where we live. And yeah, it was kind of one of those epiphanies that you get sometimes. And at least this one was a life-changing one, as opposed to just kind of a small thing. But yeah, I went to I quit my job like 5 months later, and I was in grad school that August. So
how yeah, I mean that's that's a 180, and I think it's fantastic. And I guess I would say I've had similar kind of moments where you're like, wow, that's gonna change me. But then you kind of lose the wind out of the sail, and you find yourself kind of like slowing back down into the normal routine. How did you not lose that?
That is a great question, because I went from having probably the highest paying job, well, not anymore, but it was at the time of my life, and I was doing great. I mean, I could walk to work. I mean, I had great friends there, and I miss those guys. But going from that into like broke grad school, and having to live off like whatever Whole Foods offered on Saturdays for free, and art openings for dinner on the weekends. That was a big change for me and for anyone really. And I really don't know. I don't know how I kept going. I pretty resilient person. I persevere. I run marathons, so endurance is one of my things. And so I guess that's what it was. When I set my mind to something, I got to finish it. So I didn't think, though, when I went to grad school that I was going to teach. I had no clue what I was doing. I was pretty naive, but it kind of fell in my lap in my last year, and I started to really, really love being around students and their energy. And it kept. You know what? I think that really kept me going too, and pushing through my work, and as demoralizing as it was sometimes. I mean that was they kept me going, and so I said maybe I should try this teaching thing. And that's kind of how it all played out.
It is kind of a weird moment when you say, well, let me try this, and you try it and you're like, wow, where'd that come from? Where's that been all my life? Yeah.
No, I totally agree, and I still am pretty introverted, and getting in front of a classroom, to me, like thinking about that maybe as like a younger Eric, would have totally terrified me.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I get up in front of the classroom, and whatever sort of, I don't know, second thoughts that are in my head or nervousness leave. And right after I'm done, I'm nervous again. But during that period of time, I'm able to push through it, and I actually really, really enjoy it.
That's fantastic. I've got the opposite problem. I'm very extroverted.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was a radio disc jockey personnel.
I could tell by the voice.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm not gonna pull out my my radio call sign moment with you. I do that for my students every now and then, but
oh, cool.
Yeah, they pick on me, but it's welcome. I appreciate it. So I mean, it's an interesting transition for you then. So you got into teaching. What did you start teaching? So are your classes involved? I'm kind of jumping around here, but I think we'll bring it back to talk about the research a little bit. But I'm kind of wondering then, when you started teaching, were the classes associated with the stuff you were loving?
No, not at all. I ended up at the University of Illinois. My partner, my wife, she also is an academic, and it made sense for her too. And when I interviewed here, I I met a person who I just was like, I need to work with this guy.
Mm. Okay.
His name is John Jennings. He's at Cal Riverside now, but when I got there, it's very, very much a print design curriculum, type focused. And I was
Mhm.
thrown into teaching typography, which I had never really thought about teaching before. And I wanted to really get into what I was doing with my graduate degree and why I went to grad school. And I wanted to be part of like a way to excite students about this. But immediately I was thrown into these classes where, I mean, how do you teach that in typography? How do you teach
Mhm.
that in a software class? And that was tough. And eventually I think I kind of came to some sort of um, conclusion that, I kind of had like this soup and vegetables analogy where, I wanted a class which like the soup where I could talk about all these things,
Yeah.
sustainability, ethics, social impact, but I couldn't get it because it wasn't in the curriculum. So I got to give the students some vegetables as much as I could in some of the other classes. So I found a way to introduce, readings and smaller projects that kind of got to part of the conversation, but not all of it.
Mhm.
So it was frustrating in the very beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. So where did it start out with? So eventually we're going to talk about Fresh Press. But did it start with Fresh Press? Was that kind of going from the get go?
Not at all. When I went to grad school, I just thought I just need to figure out and find some sort of way to be comfortable with being a designer, knowing all the negative things I can do by just designing something that's printed, right? And or something that's online, energy, greenhouse gases, this type of thing. And
Mhm.
it started actually with Renourish, renourish.org, which is now a nonprofit, but it was my thesis at the University of Texas. And I struggled for a long time to figure out what that final output was going to be. And a professor there said, this needs to be a website. Oh, there's my
Mhm.
cat.
Hey.
She made her appearance.
Awesome.
And so it was a website in the end, even though I fought it for a long time, just because it was able to have, anyone could access it from their desk at their office or from a student from their computer or an educator. So that's where it all started was with that website.
Yeah. It's funny. My cat does that exactly too. Walk across the
Yeah,
keyboard.
walked right in front of my face.
Yeah. You wait for that moment where they like step on things and shut things off.
I was worried about that.
Yeah, no worries. If it happens, we'll get back into the conversation and I'll just kind of seamlessly make it magical in post. So tell us a little bit more than about what Renourish is, what it is.
Yeah, it started in grad school as, I was reading a bunch of things and they were online, they were in books, they were in journal articles. And kind of what I discovered was there was all this information out there about, for and specific graphic designers about how they could do better, basically, from an environmental perspective. But it was all over the place. There was never like a concise book. It was like a chapter here and there and a few websites with some links. So I started to gather everything and curate it as well as put in my own 2 cents. And that's what Renourish was just this online resource where everything was there for you. And, I wanted to be very practical. So when someone came to that site from their design studio or office, they didn't have to ask a bunch of questions. It was just all kind of laid out for them.
Hmm.
And that's where, my research started was there. And, I
Okay.
kind of learned how to research in grad school. And that was the output, that
Yeah.
thesis, and then the website.
I actually want to I'm going to take myself a note. I actually want to come back to this idea of learning to do research. So there's my
Okay.
note, learning to do research. But I also, just listening to you talk, it wasn't a 180 perhaps. So you were in that digital programming world. You had you still did print, you still had a passion for design,
Yeah.
but then you had also this, recycling thought in the back of your mind. But to be able to gather all that research data, to tabulate it, to put it into a system where it works on the back end,
Yeah.
where it's just magical for me as a user. That took your expertise in that industry for a while. So maybe the turn was slower than you think. Maybe, yeah.
I think you're probably right. But I did fight the idea of making it online because I was just kind of over doing that because I had done it for 6 years prior. And
yeah.
But I mean, my professor was right, and I just had to do it. So. I gave in.
it does make sense, right? Because you're talking about, where to save all the way around. But I can understand your confrontation with that because still having a computer turned on, having servers, having hosting, it's all using power somewhere, somehow.
Right.
So it's a big conversation about our web pages sustainable.
Correct. Yeah, no, you're right about that. And I do address that in the site about finding hosting services that or working with vendors who use renewable energy or, are buying into renewable energy if they don't have it on their own facility. Because that's a huge amount of energy just from these, Google uses, I'm sure, way more energy than you and us, you and I. Yeah. And so, they're moving towards 100% renewable.
Oh, wow.
As is Apple.
I was going to ask you if you had any data on some of those digital giants.
I'll just stick with Google and Apple because they have huge cloud servers and, they're moving towards, if not very close to 100% renewable. I'm sure some of it's economical why they're doing it because their energy bills are high, but I think they're also realizing they have a huge imprint, So that's something that I did talk about it's still on the site. And it does have some suggestions about how to do that better, how to work with the right people.
Yeah. So even Renurse will work for any user that wants to go there, even to kind of get an idea for their own digital stuff as well.
I hope so. That's the goal.
Yeah. Does it have print then as well? I did go there and clicked around, but I didn't have any data to kind of like put in through stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it has a couple pages about print and ink and paper, and then it has some downloadable things and it has some tools that you can use too that help you size projects from the beginning, from the press sheet, kind of working backwards.
Okay.
So yeah, we try to cover all the bases. Hopefully it's doing its job. But
yeah, all those print production folks listen in and jump over there. Hey, tell me about graphic junk. I'm looking at some of your selected publications here.
Well, that kind of came from basically why I went to grad school, where one of my jobs before I moved to Texas was I was doing a lot of direct mail. I thought I was doing a great job because I would spend like hours on these things, and I thought they were gorgeous. And I think one day I was just at my mailbox and I'm like going through junk mail is another, we probably all call it junk mail as opposed to direct mail. And I was just throwing it right there in the trash. And then I kind of stopped for a minute and I was like, wait a second. I mean, it wasn't my piece that was thrown away, but someone else's. And I remember doing this stuff and I got pretty verklempt for a moment and said, I'm just making beautiful trash or graphic junk. And that really hit me. I didn't even know what to do. I was kind of depressed for a while.
I think I've been there too. I think it happens. Oh, yeah? I think it happens every time,
Yeah.
Every time I pop open that trash can, although I'm recycling it, it's still like, I just can't believe this is, happening.
Yeah. I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Did you ever check the data on the outcomes of that? I've always wondered, I'm sure there are some companies that do an analysis of their outcomes for that. I know not
Yeah.
enough do because they keep doing it. You know?
Well, yeah, I think like the universally accepted, it might just be North American data on that is it's around a 3% response rate to direct mail. So 3% of the people who get it actually do something, like buy something,
Yeah.
reach out. So it's pretty low. So it's
Yeah.
97% failure rate is another way to look at it.
That changes the story a lot,
It
doesn't it?
does, right? It does.
Yeah. So then you actually started doing some stuff here. It's a few, not too much later, a couple years later. Sustainable design education. Yeah, explain that just a little bit to me.
Sure.
Sustainable design education.
That kind of came from, of course, my going to grad school and then trying to then take what I did there into teaching, and then coming here to the University of Illinois, and we've actually done a 180 since I got here, which I think is really refreshing.
Yeah.
But when I got here, it was tough to bring that topic up, although they hired me for that reason. So I just had to start like writing about stuff and then talking with people at conferences about it, and then attempting it in some way, shape, or form in the classroom, and learning what from other people were doing too. So that particular article that you're probably referring to, or presentation, that was sort of my early thoughts on it, on how to teach sustainable design to graphic designers in particular. And it was, some of it's still, like, I think pretty accurate, but I've learned a lot since I started, and that was sort of my first pass at it.
Yeah.
And,
okay. I don't know if I should ask how that then is reflected in the classroom for you and how that's been developing. Why not? Let's do that now, and then we'll get back to some of the other stuff here in a minute.
Sure. Yeah. Well, when I first started doing it, I felt like I was met with a lot of pushback from the students. Today, in this era, Generation Z students are significantly more aware of our global problems, our local problems even, than those 10 years ago. I don't get any pushback these days. In fact, I get students coming to me wanting to know more about the things that I'm doing and how they can make a difference. And 10 years ago, it was uphill battle every day with not everybody, but a vast majority of the students where I just want a job, man. Is this going to get me a job? I'm like, I mean, it could. I don't know.
It'll add value, right?
It'll add value.
It'll add value.
I wish I would have said that.
Yeah. So what does that look like then as far as teaching?
Well, I think nowadays, I think I learned a really big lesson around 9 years ago teaching, where I was bringing what I would consider my values to the classroom or to the project, and maybe it was a little bit heavy-handed. And I think maybe that's why I got as much pushback as I did. Once I started to sort of ask them, what are your values? What are your goals? And where do you want to be in life 5 years from now? That's when we really could get into a discussion about everything that's going on. And then they started to sort of connect the dots, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, what they wanted to do may not happen because of X, or climate change, in this case. And then they started to wonder what could they do maybe now to be prepared for that. And that was the way to go. And I definitely recommend that for teachers in general who are trying to bring topics into the classroom that maybe just aren't necessarily, old Swiss modernist typography type questions.
Right.
Yeah.
I did see a couple of the projects that Fresh Press is working on. So did you find a way to bring this then not only into the conversation, but into the project work, into the outcomes?
Not as much as I
the
wish.
Artifact, yeah.
Yeah, not as much as I wish, and I do now and then when it comes to like, I know that they're going to be doing something on purpose that's printed, and the paper that I make is all from agricultural byproducts like corn stover, rye, prairie grass, sunflower stalks, and basically, when I know it's going to be a print related project, I will bring in Fresh Press for that. They can make the paper themselves and print on it. Sort of the sort of unfortunate reason why it's not included as much is that it's actually really the lab itself is really far away from from the design school.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can take a bus, you can ride a bike. Walking is really hard. And driving, I'm trying not to have them drive for carbon emissions standpoints, and that's been kind of a big downer, is just how far it is and how that limits the ability for the students to get there.
Yeah. I'm sure location is everything for something like that. And even for the students, sure, they can reach out to a lot of different paper companies that have a sustainable sheet, whether or not it's a 20% versus an 80% or 100%, that's another question. But then trying to get some sample sheets and in a timely fashion and stuff like that, it becomes a daunting task for them. But I at least try to have that discussion with them to say, you can get this paper if this is something you really want to put into this. So
it's a good lesson, because like my paper can be expensive because it's handmade, and then you need to have a plan B.
Yeah, boy, that'd be a great conversation. I don't know if we'll get into that, but dollar to dollar comparison of sustainability,
correct,
versus just regular pulp paper. I've been to Nina Paper. I've been to Mohawk. Their plants, and it's just amazing when you get to those yards of downed trees and how much production is happening in those. It was quite shocking. I think it was the web paper mill for Mohawk up on the Hudson, up on the Hudson River. Yeah. That was.
I've never been there, but I've just heard stories.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was awesome, but it was also like shocking. It's like, wow. How much paper, how much wood, how many trees, just kind of run through one door and out the other door.
It's fast.
It is fast. Yeah, we're not going to try to bring it down around the conversation, but that's I guess that's where the argument comes in. Of cost. It's like environmental cost versus financial cost. It's true. It changes the thing. I'm going to jump us back now. I love these words. Another one of the publications that you have, D-Zombies. So I'm guessing that's like design zombies, right?
Correct.
And the coming of the design apocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
The urgent need to increase racial diversity and environmental awareness. Yeah.
So that was a long time coming. That I think originally I did that in like 2011, and it was a short article and a presentation at a AIGA Design Educators Conference, and then I tried to get that published. I wasn't tenured at the time, so I'm like, hey, I gotta get my work out, and no one wanted to publish it. No one wanted to touch it.
Interesting.
And eventually, the AIGA Dialectic Journal did publish it, which I was very excited for. But that kind of came from the work that I did with a colleague here at Illinois, John Jennings, who's one of the co-authors on that, in the classroom, and we were talking about we created this ethics class when we could not get a class to teach anything but typography, right? We said we're going to make our own ethics class, and we broke it into a module and 2 modules. So it was like biodiversity and then diversity. So we had race and ethnicity and then the environment in that class. And that kind of sparked a whole bunch of other projects, but that pretty much was the catalyst for this term DeZombies. I'm a big zombie fan. I'm not a fan of like ever having zombies,
Yeah, right.
but I enjoy watching, zombie films and television shows and reading the books. So we started to combine these two things together, and we thought about this, basically it goes back to George Romero's version of zombies, which is this mindless consumption. It was if you ever go back to watching like Dawn of the Dead and any of those George Romero movies, they are commentary on American capitalism is really what they are. And so we were using Romero's version of the zombie to sort of give, to be, I think, a little bit controversial
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in our own criticism of the design discipline and then the educational system
Yeah.
that we're into.
Man, I could see, this is going to make you laugh though, but a design documentary, instead of like Helvetica and,
Yeah,
the linotype and, graphic means, we could have, D-zombie apocalypse.
love
That
it.
would be
I
awesome.
love it. I'm in.
Yeah. So let's touch on the racial diversity aspect of that.
Mm-hmm.
So any research behind that? What have you found out?
Sure.
I talk about that a lot in one of my upper level design classes, where we try to talk a little bit about the history of graphic design and how, the Philip Meggs Bible, I mean, we all lived it, loved it, learned it, but it is, very dominant European white
It is.
Designers.
Yeah, and that's a huge component of what inspired the paper, the presentation, and I know I have a lot of data towards the end of that paper, but that I can't remember the specifics of. But I do know that in general, right, students, you just look at the demographic of students probably in your classroom. It depends on how expensive the university is, but the more expensive it is, the less diverse ethnicity the classroom is.
Definitely.
And probably on the same page, the less diverse the ethnicity of the faculty are. And so that's really problematic when you talk about, a sustainable society. And that's what we talk about in the paper as well, is just academia needs to be a lot more of a reflection of what, who's living in America, for instance, because we're here in America. And it isn't, right? It's still predominantly white male, and the type of social and cultural decisions we're teaching our design students are, again, European white male, where the culture outside is ebbing and flowing in many different directions, and that isn't necessarily captured in our projects as much as it should be. So that's what the paper is referring to. And of course, we use the term apocalypse just to, there's some seriousness to that, but there's also some like, hey, read this, it's controversial.
So now I'm actually going to ask you about the indigenous rights and climate fiction storytelling. Storytelling is a great conversation in itself, but to link that to indigenous rights and climate fiction storytelling.
Yeah, climate fiction is kind of a subset of science fiction as a genre. And I'm a little bit all over the place, and I kind of always have been ever since I was a kid. But the way I've started to pretty much define my research is that I go between these two ideas of utopia and dystopia. So I would feel like Fresh Press and Renourish are in this utopian, let's try to fix things, there's hope. But then there's this other side to me, and maybe it's just my love for science fiction and dystopian fiction in general, that I still gravitate towards that type of work. And so I really enjoy writing, and I never used to as a kid, but I do now. And I love using the design process and how I write. So taking the example of the Amazon fires happening as we speak, the people that are most affected by that are the indigenous people living in the Amazon, and in general across the planet. Land grabs and mining, these are all happening on lands owned by people that are indigenous to that area. And what rights do they have, right? They've won a number of battles in court, specifically in Canada, the First Nations battles there, but they're on the forefront of climate change, and they're battling it every day, where we may not see it, but they see it. And so I'm working on a project which is going to be a collection of short stories in which a number of the characters are indigenous, but it's pretty much in the early stages, and I'm collaborating with a graphic novelist who named Damian Duffy, who did Octavia Butler's Kindred adaptation. If you're a fan of Octavia Butler and science fiction, a lot of her work is actually coming true, which is kind of scary. But I've been talking about this for a couple years and trying to get it off the ground, and we're kind of stuck in some creative, creative writing blocks, we'll call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everyone gets there through one channel or another, and then we got to find our way out of it. But it's
really
definitely
stuck.
possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hopefully something kind of sparks for you, and that gets rolling again. That sounds like a really interesting endeavor for sure.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Let's jump over then to Fresh Press. We've been kind of highlighting it a little bit here and there, but we haven't really got into the conversation.
Sure.
So go for it. How would you introduce that then?
So Fresh Press, it started in 2012, and it started because I needed to find, it started for a couple reasons, but one of them was I needed to find a way to be okay with living in the flat prairies of Illinois.
I spent 4.5 years in the flats of northern Indiana, so
what I mean then.
Yes, very much so.
And I would always go to the mountains and wonder, what am I doing in Illinois? So I had to find a way. And with Renourish, I was able to travel the world through that project, giving talks and whatnot. And I would always advocate for, not using tree-based papers. They need to be in the ground. Climate. We are in a climate emergency. We should not be deforesting any more than we should not be deforesting, pretty much, period. Everyone nodded in agreement, and eventually they started to ask me after these talks, like, well, where do we find these papers? You're talking about this wheat-based paper. We can't find it, or when we do find it, it's very expensive. What do you recommend? So eventually I just said, you know what, I'm just going to start making the paper myself. The downside was I had no idea how to do that. And so,
interesting.
I was not a trained paper maker. I could read about it online, of course, but luckily for me, there was another professor at University of Illinois named Steve Costell, and he was a classically trained hand paper maker in the Western style. And we just started to get together. Passing conversations in the hallway led to a serious meeting over beer, and a couple of grants came out of that night. And lo and behold, we got it. And we started Fresh Press in 2012, so it's been 7 years. And what we're doing there is we're really trying to find a way to use agricultural byproducts to make better paper than trees can make, from a carbon footprint, from a strength standpoint. And so we're collaborating with engineers, librarians.
Oh, great. Wow.
and they're testing all these things in the lab. So when it comes down to it, we can say, this is 66% smaller footprint, which we can say from prairie grass, and so we're really trying to change the paper supply chain from forest to farm.
Okay.
And get rid of trees as paper.
I just spoke with Megan D. She's AIGA DEC co-chair. Yeah. And
yes.
Our conversation kind of led to research and the importance of your local community, your local network, and who's there, what's there, that really kind of starts to shape a lot of your, not you specifically, but us as educators, starts to shape your research. And that's something that I think that I was aware of, but never really kind of stopped and thought about that long enough to go, okay, that's a really important thing to remember. But now it's so true for you too. I think if you wanted to do something a little bit different, the opportunities wouldn't be there for you. So it was running into your colleague, the location, for the vegetation that you're sourcing, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. When we'd go to living in Champaign, we go to Chicago a lot because it's the bigger city close by. And when you drive up I-57 north, in the middle median, you see prairie grass. On the left, you see soy. On the right, you see corn. And so those are the three things we started with. It was just right there in front of us. So that's where we all began.
So are you using byproducts of the agriculture then, rather than taking the agriculture itself?
Correct. Yeah. So there was a study done, I think, in 2009 by the USDA about it was made for biofuels, so ethanol and all that. And what they determined is about 30% of the yield, the waste of the yield, whether it be the stalks or whatever, for instance, in this case it was corn, is not needed to go back into the soil for soil nutrition, because you got to till that back in to, help regenerate that soil for next planting. But 30% of it you don't need. So we've been working with a couple farmers locally, and when they're done with the harvest, we text them and say, "Hey, got any corn, corn stalks?" And they bale it up for us, and we go pick it up. So that's kind of how it's working. I think ideally the farmers would sell it.
Yeah.
They'd sell it to the big paper mills.
Well, that was kind of my next question. Is that a cost to Fresh Press, or is it because of the link to the research in the university that they're more than willing to work with you?
Yeah, it's the latter. They're more than willing to work with us, but we tell them, like, if this works out, the idea is like you could sell for extra revenue to a paper mill. Right, that's the idea, and it's starting to catch on. And the state of Washington is building a wheat straw paper mill up there called Columbia Pulp, and it's getting close to being done. But that's what they're going to do. They're going to be taking excess wheat straw from probably both Canada and the U.S. To make paper. So I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, definitely. And in a way, there's some side benefits to that. It keeps our trucking industry rolling as well. And I mean, I don't think that's struggling, but there's a lot of benefits to that. As long as you can weigh out those financial costs of transporting that material. But
well, farmers right now, because of Chinese tariffs, I mean, they're really hurting. And if they had other ways to sell what they grow or what they don't even need at the end of growing, I mean, that would be big for them, and it's sad to see the state of affairs that they're in right now, and we didn't really predict that. But I mean, hey, you introduce what we're doing. I mean, that can save some farms. So that'd be amazing.
What do they do with that waste otherwise? Do they just burn that, or?
Some of them do, right? There's a loophole in the Clean Air Act where they can burn it. And
which others, goes against the carbon footprint. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. If they could sell it, I mean, I'm sure they would.
Yeah.
So,
all right, I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Okay.
Pushback. This sounds great, right? This is like, wow, this is amazing. Tell me about some of the pushback, some of the negative attributes that you experience.
The biggest is that I'm a graphic designer, and here I am. I've gone to like different things where I'm in rooms with farmers and rooms with engineers and business people, and they're just like, "You're a graphic designer. What do you know about, cover crops or tilling or the price of soybeans in the Chicago trade market? What do you know about this stuff? Why should we believe you?" I'm a professor. I'm got some brains, but I get a lot of pushback just by my job title, just by walking in there. And So that's been real
Right.
tough,
You
actually.
get the you think you know it all.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. And why should I trust an artist on this?
Yeah.
This type of thing.
That's going to lead me to a great segue then, because
Okay.
I wrote down here learning to research.
Hmm.
Did that play a huge role here? I'm guessing yes.
It did for sure. It did play a big role, and that's why I got engineers involved. Because I don't know how to do that stuff, but they do, and they've been really helpful with giving me data. And so
Mhm.
when those questions come back at me, I spew out the data, and tell them why it's better,
Mhm.
and that we've tested it. It's gone through this and that, and so that helps a little bit, but it still hasn't gotten to where I want it to be yet.
Yeah. Uh,
Obviously, more people would have heard about it if it did. So,
of course. I think it'll keep growing momentum in that. Any other struggles?
um,
I'm
well,
thinking of one
yes.
that I might ask you, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah. This isn't necessarily pushback, but it's a struggle. Is that um, all of us as educators probably have this struggle, and that's I'm in the classroom teaching. I'm also the program chair of graphic design with I think 11 faculty and 200 and some students, 10 grad students, and then I'm supposed to be running a nonprofit called Renourish out in Boston, and then I got this paper lab, and so time is a huge struggle, and
Yeah.
I'm a dad to a 10-year-old, and I'm running her
Yeah.
all over the place, and it's hard to get in there and really focus on it, and I feel like if I had more time to focus on it, it would be doing more
Yeah.
than what it
Yeah.
is.
It is always tough to juggle those priorities
Yeah.
and job roles and stuff. That does kind of lead me to another thing I was going to ask about in the struggle is business, right?
Mhm.
Having to be a business person
God.
as well.
Yes. That's tough. So I'm not a great business person. I think I'm just too nice, and I ended up giving stuff away. And yeah, come on in, have one. And so I've been looking at the one direction I've been looking at was I'm going to get the data and prove these people that this is the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other side of it is like, what if they just had it and they could just see for themselves, right? So I've been looking for business ventures to, get these wholesaled in different paper supply stores and boutique stores. And I've had at least 2 or 3 contact me about it, but then, it is through the university. So the university lawyers have to write
Yeah.
all the stuff, and then it scares people away, I think. So,
Yeah, been there. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? It's a bunch of
Yeah,
red
yeah.
tape, and they get kind of skeptical about signing them. But I've been looking for the business side of it too, just to keep it going. And I used to employ 8 students at a living wage through some grant money that I had, and I'm like, I need to find a way to actually turn this into more of a business so that I can keep these people employed and just keep it going and keep it active. And it's hustling all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been 7 years of doing that. And I'm a little bit tired, but I'm still fighting it. I'm still fighting for it.
That's great. Hang in there. Hang in there,
I'm
man.
trying.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
Well, maybe we'll get some outreach of some other faculty from other universities that have similar goals.
Oh yeah, that'd be
maybe there's
fantastic.
opportunity. Who knows? Fellowships, residencies. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, if you're listening to this, please send those over.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the other things I had written down here was this idea of I guess I'll end the research thing. I think it's more important now. Like when we were in undergrad,
Yeah.
research was important, but they really didn't focus on that.
Right.
I think that's one of the biggest changes now. I think our students in undergrad, you need to know how to research because you have to be able to do it right, know what you're talking about, so on and so forth. But you mentioned a few times here about the global climate, local communities, sustainability. Is there? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll just kind of leave that there, global and local, and kind of what you think of the two in relation to some of the work you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. what I've been really talking to my students about recently in the past 4 or 5 years was simply about the difference between local and global change, right? And I'm always encouraging my students to think about it from a local perspective. And that's how I'm working with Fresh Press in particular. I'm using local farmers, everything within 10-mile radius, and that's mainly because the students are asking me more and more, which I think is really fantastic, about what can they do. We
Mm-hmm.
want to do good in our lives, and we don't want to just be status quo. And so I tell them, like, you're going to probably be better at making local change than global change because you're going to be there and you're on the ground in Champaign, Urbana, or Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
wherever they end up going, and and they get to know the people, and they're part of the community, and the community accepts it, and the list goes on. But then also they're going to be there when the change happens,
Yeah.
hopefully,
Yeah.
and then they get inspired and they want to do it again.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah,
I'm predicting. I've said this a few times, so I guess I'm going permanently on record now.
okay,
I am predicting we are going to shift from a global economy to a more locally driven economy. I think that's what's going to support the global economy. There's just more and more people, like I said, concerned about how do I help my community because nobody
yeah,
else is. So
true.
how can we do it for ourselves in those local economies?
I think in particular, energy is going to be all local,
Hmm.
decentralized. You producing your own energy on your house, underground, geothermal, or something, right?
Hmm.
I think for sure that's definitely going to happen, and I think it's maybe a signifier for other sort of trends to happen in the same way. Maybe your
Hmm.
prediction in particular, but I'd like to see
Yeah.
that happen. I'd like to see
Right.
that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I would as well. Um, so we talked a little bit about that local global economy.
Hmm.
Have you noticed anything in how it changes the society from that local to global, maybe even regional? I guess we could throw
Sure.
that in there.
Well, yeah, just from like my own personal things that I've done, and then with the classes that I've taught, we worked with an urban garden here in town that does some amazing work with hiring at-risk. They use the term at-risk kids, which I don't know if I like that term, but whatever.
Sure, sure.
They hire students basically in high school who are headed down the wrong path, and they give them a way to get back towards a better future. And not only that, they grow amazing food, right? So I guess the way that I could possibly address that question you asked is simply that um, I'm friends with the person now that runs that garden, right? And she's friends with the people in the community where the garden is, and the parents or the parent of the kid who works there, and you kind of shrink that community even closer, or you bring them closer. Like now I can go probably meet those people, based on how my students and how I was a part of helping that nonprofit at Garden.
Right.
And I remember students that worked on that, they still talk about that project because it really affected them because they saw something real happen. It wasn't just like, hey, that was a nice poster and it went out in town and you saw it in town.
Yeah.
This was people's lives changed. We were designing, we were asked to design resumes for these high school kids and stuff. So that, hey, they had something, they didn't know how to do this, and they had something. Some of them weren't going to go to college, so
Yeah.
they got something, and they could get something from a job standpoint after
Yeah.
high school. So like that's a big deal, and seeing that change local, that I think that really it definitely impacted me and those students as well.
That's awesome. That's a great story, which I'm wonderful at segues, by the way. Maybe that's part of one of your stories somehow. maybe there's a story there.
Thank you. I need some inspiration. So definitely,
Yeah.
I write what you know. That's the thing. And
Yeah.
so I'm gonna take your advice. See what happens with that.
All right. I don't need any credit lines or thank you pages. It's all good.
Dedication page, right?
Yeah. What's coming up then? You are talking about these stories, but what else is how long have you been chair?
Too long. No, 5 years.
It does take a toll. I know it does.
Yes.
So you've been doing that for a while. Fresh Press has been around for how many years?
7.
7 years. And Renourish is,
Oh God.
it's over 10 now, right?
13
years.
Jeez. It's a teenager.
Yeah. What's coming next then? What's like a year? What's 5 years? What's your big goal maybe?
This is a great question because I am struggling with this answer right now in
Same.
my
I am
personal
too.
life. Yeah, that's good to hear. It's good to hear that I'm not alone here. I think a lot of my not knowing the definitive answer to your question has to do with just the times that we're in and how I'm in a little, and I know I'm not alone in this, but it's sort of a struggle to see what the world's doing and why it's doing what it's doing. And there's always some positive, but there's seemingly a lot more negative. But just from a Renourish standpoint, because that's my teenage project. That's going through a lot of rewrite and rethinking. And it has to do with the term sustainability, which came up earlier in this talk. And I started to ask myself, like, what are we trying to sustain? And that website's sort of saying what we were doing right now, we're going to sustain by making these differences in how we design. And if we sustain what we're doing right now, we're in some deep trouble.
Yes. Yeah. I think I actually read that in some of your writing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Actually, it was that short video on Fresh Press and Renourish. That was fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll be sure to put a link to that also. So is there a link? Is there a link to that?
There's a Vimeo link I can send you. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's where I watched it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're going to drop a bunch of stuff in the links so people can find stuff. All right. Continue.
Okay. So that's where I started to come up with, not come up, but really kind of rethink just that term and what that site is really doing and how much of a change it's really making. I think in general, I just want to do more to make a difference, and I'm not doing enough, and not everyone's doing enough collectively or individually. And this is an emergency. This is a 10-year window we have to really prevent a 2-degree centigrade rise in global temperature. And we can't sit back and just hope someone else does something. We actually have to be very active in our roles and lives, politically and career-wise. So part of me is like, I need to readdress what that sustainability really means. And so for me, we need to give back.
Yeah.
We've taken too much.
Yeah. That just kind of hit me because I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York. And now I'm living in central Arkansas. I'm not even in Little Rock. I'm about 30 minutes away from Little Rock to the north. Beautiful natural community. It's not called the natural state just because they felt like it. It's probably the most beautiful surroundings I think I've experienced. And I've been all over. I've been, Oregon, Seattle, New York. I've been up to Vermont, Boston, all the way down to Georgia, Denver, so I've traveled. Haven't been to Arizona yet. So that's on my list. But it hits home to me because when I think back, when I go visit my parents, I'm like, boy, it's really bad here. Like the Buffalo Steel plant, for those that have ever heard of it, it's basically this rotting carcass of land that they just can't do anything with because it's just not environmentally sound.
Oh, that's sad.
And it's right on the Lake Erie shoreline, Wow. But then I sit here in this beautiful wooded, hilly Ozark mountain range and just go, wow, we have such a beautiful country, but it's not like that everywhere,
True.
So it's really, I think we all need to kind of recall that and kind of look and analyze at where we're at, and we can make a difference no matter where we're at. So
No, I agree with you, and it's a gift to live there and where you are, and we have this great gift in where we live, and we're kind of taking it for granted. And I feel like that idea of renourishing what we took away is really the only path forward. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that. I don't know.
Right.
I think Fresh Press has a part to play in that, because a lot of the prairie grass that we use that's grown nearby, I mean, that's an amazing regenerative plant for soils. And our soil can absorb a lot of carbon. And that's something we should think about. And hey, graphic designers use paper, bringing it back to graphic design or design. And why not use prairie grass for paper and at the same time regenerate that soil?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a great message to kind of leave everyone considering and thinking about. And we've got almost an hour of conversation here under our belts, and that's absolutely fantastic. So I think we'll, like I say to all my guests, I would love to come back and talk about this more as things develop, if that opportunity arises.
Thank you.
So let's keep in touch, keep letting everyone know, keep involved with the AIGA and with the Design Educators Community, and keep feeding us what you're doing. I think that'll be fantastic. Where can people find out more? So we definitely know freshpress.studio. Where else can they kind of see what you're doing and find out about you and the other projects?
Sure. That's one great way to do it. Another website, my Renourish website, is re-nourish.org. There you can learn about what I do there. And I'm on Instagram for Fresh Press Paper. And I'm on Twitter for @Renourish. And I think those are the best places to go.
Excellent. All right, everybody, reach out to Eric and give him some support and appreciation for all his hard work. And till the next time we talk, Eric, I really appreciate our conversation.
So did I. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. You bet. All right, we'll talk to you soon, man.
Thank you.
All righty. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me on this episode. The Designed Podcast website is located at thedesignpodcast.com. There you can find notes on the episodes, links to our guests, links to resources, and more regarding the many things discussed during each show. If you find the Design Podcast interesting and informative, please subscribe on Apple Podcast or on your favorite podcast service. You can also follow the Design Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and subscribe to our video version of the podcast on YouTube. Please join us for the next episode of the Design Podcast, and let's continue to create success in design education.